Masters of the Universe Classics Director's Commentary continues at a rather rapid pace because, well, it's March 2020 and a lot of us are at home, myself included, and I have more time to record these videos, and you guys probably have more time to watch these videos, which means you should also be subscribing to these videos. Please subscribe. That would be awesome. All right, let's talk about Hordak. So the leader of the evil horde, which was introduced in the mid-'80s as a new villain into the Masters of the Universe world, or was that She-Ra world? Well, we'll talk about that subject in a minute. We brought him into the line. He was the first figure that we brought in, after we were beyond our initial rollout of the 2-packs that were then broken up into singles. We added Merman. Merman was the first, but Hordak was the first one that was not part of the original 8-pack, where we were actually expanding the line, and a lot of this was because we thought this was the last figure we were ever going to get to do. We had no idea of the success. And when it came time to doing one more figure, we thought, okay, well, who should it be? And we looked at characters like Triclops, and we looked at characters like Trapjaw, but unfortunately Trapjaw had a lot of new parts, and it was going to be more difficult to do him, even though he was probably, very extremely popular. And of course, we looked at characters like Teela, but again, Teela has a very unique body, i.e. she is a female, and that required 100% tooling, so she was out. So with that, we looked at vintage figures, and we said, Hordak actually doesn't have that many new parts. He's, a cape, armor, some weapons, boots, gloves, a head, but he basically uses the generic male buck. So we got to thinking, you know what? This would actually be a really good choice because he's kind of as A-list as you get, and we could easily do him. Now the question about, is Hordak a She-Ra bad guy or is Hordak a He-Man bad guy? And, obviously that's kind of a battle still fought today. But if we're going to talk about historical facts, and, those of you who've seen my hieroglyphic video, I'm really big on historical facts, not this historical fact, but more this historical fact. The fact that Hordak was originally created as a He-Man villain. The original book written by Tim Kilpin, who went on to become general manager of Mattel and actually gave me my job at Matty Collector, had him as a He-Man villain, as a way to refresh the brand. But at the same time, the girls group was developing the She-Ra line, and they kind of saw what the male line was doing, and the She-Ra was going to be tied into He-Man from a story standpoint, so they basically moved Hordak over from the MOTUC line and into the Princess of Power line. But again, the weird thing that happened was, the toy Hordak in the vintage line was released as part of Masters of the Universe, but he appeared on the Princess of Power show as the main villain. So it was kind of confusing, was he created for She-Ra? Was he created for He-Man? At the end of the day, he was created for He-Man as a new villain, and one who would also kind of be able to battle Skeletor as well. So he was versus Skeletor and versus He-Man. He was actually originally created based on a tiki mask that was hanging in the design area. And the designer, just kind of looked up and saw this and said, how could we make a tiki mask into a bad guy? And that's where his face came from. That was the original influence behind him. Marketing took a look at the idea, and they liked it, but they wanted to find a way to unify the new team. And that's why they insisted there be a symbol on the chest. So that way, symbols are a great way of calling about, a team, etc., etc. So he got the bat symbol, which was going to go on all the Horde characters, and eventually this, kind of became the logo for the evil Horde. And that's kind of the story of how Hordak wound up so early in the line as, the 7th or 8th figure, counting King Grayskull. But it was still very close to the 2000X, and Hordak was one of those figures that was not released in the 2000X line, except as a staction. This was actually the staction I brought in to Tim Kilpin when I pitched the idea of doing a collector line. I had the Hordak staction figure. It was one of the ones that I bought because I loved Hordak as a character, and I loved his appearance on 2000X. And he had a really cool design in 2000X, and it was very fresh in fans' minds, and they felt like he was a character that should have been released in the 2000X line. So here, when we released him in Classics, and he didn't have all the the kind of extra spiky details, he was much more simplified to look more like the original vintage figure. There were a lot of fans asking, well, okay, this is great. You gave us classic Hordak, but now can you give us 2000X Hordak? And this was kind of the very first time I had to explain to fans, look, no, we're not doing 6-inch 2000X figures. We are doing classics. And it's one of the reasons we gave Classics Hordak the staff from 2000X was to show that, like, look, we'll take some influence from that, like some weapons, but you can see the staff was even dialed back a bit from the 2000X staff. It was kind of classicized. And a lot of fans were really upset that they weren't going to get their 6-inch Classics line. You can go watch the video about the 6-inch Classics line that we had planned at the end of my time, but that's a whole other story. All right, so with that behind us, another issue fans had with him was the way we designed the armor, or rather the way the Horseman designed the armor. When it first came back, fans thought it made it look like he had a sports bra on because the armor covered his top half and then his torso was flat. The Horseman created a new flat chest piece that they wanted to use for armor characters. At first, I was actually really against this. I thought that doing this kind of armor that was going to cut off at the midriff did make him look kind of goofy. And especially because you had still had the nipples on the chest there, so if you took the armor off, it was going to look weird. But honestly, the Horsemen were right. This was their idea, and they were totally right that by doing this flat lower torso piece, it was going to allow more articulation. Because if they just did one big piece of armor, he wouldn't have been able to bend as well. So props to the Horsemen for really thinking about this. And at the end of the day, we actually did a lot of different Hordaks in the line, and we were kind of able to appease everybody who wanted, different ways the armor worked, different variants. We even got to the Filmation version, which we didn't have the rights to do at the beginning of the line, which is also why, we didn't do that Filmation-esque head and the blue skin with the first release because, well, we didn't have the right to do that. So, hey, fans always have things to say. Another difference between the classic Hordak and the vintage one was the color of the bow. His crossbow weapon was white, and the Horseman changed it to black. But, again, I kind of thought this was a cool idea, and it also gave us an excuse to do the white one later on. We released it both with a Hordak variant and in a weapons pack. So, again, the idea was we were going to get to everything in time, and doing the black bow, it did look cool. Another thing the Horsemen did, and they still are, they're brilliant sculptors, is they took the original bat that went on Hordak's arm, and instead of just doing it kind of as a shield, they transformed it into an actual kind of little mini bat dragony character that was going to hang out on Hordak's arm. That was, you can sew. That's like sew Horsemen. That's exactly the kind of things that they do. They love little, they want to give Merman little creatures as well. So this was a cool way of taking an accessory and turning it into something different and new. And it wasn't Imp, but, it was cool. Eventually we did do Imp, but again, we didn't have rights to Filmation at the beginning. So doing Imp was out of the question. So this little bat character wasn't meant to replace Imp or anything. It was just meant to be fun and be a cool thing. And if you liked it, you liked it. And if you didn't, you didn't. You didn't have to snap it on. In fact, it wasn't that easy to get on. I was always kind of frustrated with that. It's one of the pieces that just it was really, it's tough to kind of get to click. All right, so kind of wrapping it up, as we head towards the bios, here was my big boo-boo. So the original wording was the ruthless leader of the evil horde. And when I was transcribing all of the original verbiage, I screwed up, and I called him the evil leader of the evil horde, which was definitely repetitive. But hey, my fault. I totally take the blame for that one, and we all move on. Another thing in the bios was his name, Hector Kerr, and people immediately started saying that we named him after a gardener. I don't know. I'm not familiar with a gardener named Hector, but maybe someone out there had a gardener named Hector. I got a lot of email over that one. The name came from really, kind of Greek mythology. Hector is in the Iliad. He's one of the main characters from Ilium, where Troy. Troy was called Ilium, hence the Iliad. So he was one of the heroes of Troy, and Hector in Greek actually means a bully, and he was a bit of a bully character in the story, at least until he killed and paraded around dead on a chariot, but that's an entirely different epic altogether. So Hector basically meaning bully, because that's really, Hordak was very much a bully character. He was always bullying everyone, and a lot of this might have been because he had brother issues, because his brother was in charge of the Empire. And then cur is a word meaning cowardly, or cowardly dog. So basically, his whole name, Hector Cur, meant, cowardly dog, or cowardly bully dog, essentially. And that definitely describes what Hordak is like. He really is, he's kind of a coward in the end, and he's definitely kind of a jerk. Oh yeah, and he was also kind of named after Captain Barbossa.